Here we go. All right. Hey, let me do that again. Hey, everybody, this is Gene Jensen with BassResource.com, and welcome to my live hangout. Today, I kind of want to talk about summertime fishing. Summertime fishing is my least favorite thing to do. I hate summertime fishing. It's hot, it's miserable, the bass are deep, they're hard to find, and everything else. But, you know, I've gotten to the point over the last few years where going out and catching one or two fish and doing this really is an experience, you know, and it's something I'm very proud of, being able to just go catch maybe a limit of fish in the summertime. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I've got a list of things to run down. You know, if you guys are watching this on YouTube and want to join in, you can go to my Facebook page, my Flukemaster Facebook page, and there's a link you can click on to join in. And then once you're in, we'll just chit chat and talk and everything else and give suggestions. One thing, though, is I'm going to try to get as many people in as I can that want to. So if you're hanging out down at the bottom of my screen down there and not really asking questions or anything else over a certain period of time, if I notice it, I'll knock you out of this conversation and let somebody else in. Don't get mad at me over it or anything else. It's just what it is. Just go to YouTube and watch it and try to get in again if you got a question. Another thing, I'm going to try to watch the comments over on YouTube. I'm not really good at that, so don't hate me if I forget to. I get into the conversation and totally forget to look over there. But I'm going to try to watch the comments and pick out questions as they pop up that pertain to what we're talking about. So anyway, let's get started. Let's see, I've got 4 people on here so far. Usually a little more than that by now, but anyway, they're going to pop in. So it's just what it is. Just go to YouTube and watch it and try to get in again if you got a question. They usually Mike, I muted you for just a minute because I'm really good at that. When you pop in, that's usually what happens. I get into the conversation and totally forget to look up. There we go. I'll unmute you here in just a second. As soon as your audio stops lagging. Just happens. Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome Jonathan and Mike and the Bassmaster 1231. Doug and Corey are some regulars on this deal. So let's start talking about. Let's see. Anybody know what the major things that bass need in the summertime? What they're looking for the most?
Oxygen.
Air. And food. You know. And so if you can, they're not looking to spawn or anything else. They're looking for air and they're looking for food. So basically, what you're looking for is those places that are going to have the optimum amount of air and going to have the food. And the way I find the air is I look for the food first. I look for those bait fish, and the bait fish. Uh-oh, my camera just fell. And the bait fish are what tell you where the best air is a lot of times. Now there are places where you can't see bait fish, or if you don't have a fish finder, how do you know? Some of the places that I look for the most amount of oxygenated water is in live grass or in submerged grass, hydrilla, milfoil, whatever you have. I mean, down in South Florida they have dozens and dozens of different types of grass, but I'm looking for what holds that oxygen, and if there's a lot of grass, it also gives you the perfect cover for bait fish and the perfect cover for bass to ambush bait fish. So if I'm on a lake with a lot of grass in the summertime, I'm happy, about as happy as I can be. It being, outside today was 95 degrees here in Georgia, and I went and mowed my lawn at 8 o'clock this morning, and this had a gray shirt on like this, and it was soaking wet at the end. So I don't like the heat. I have a little bit more insulation than I used to, and so being fat's no fun in the summertime. But I tell you, the grass produces, when you have what do they call it, photosynthesis, and it produces the oxygen that is needed for these fish. It also has the little grass shrimp and the things that the bluegill eat and stuff like that. One thing I'm not looking for in grass is I'm not looking for shad. If you're talking about matching the hatch, I know a lot of you guys really think about matching the hatch. You don't hardly see shad in the grass. It's always bluegill, and it's other type of sunfish that hang out in the grass. And so if I'm going to match the hatch, I'm going to be using something that looks like a bluegill or looks like a crawfish. There's crawfish that hang out in the grass. Another place to look for oxygen is in current. If you've got rapids, or you've got water coming out of another dam, or water coming out of a creek, or just an inflow of water, that tends to oxygenate the rest of the water that's around, and that'll concentrate your bait fish. If you've got wind blowing and stirring up the surface of the water, it will push oxygen into the it'll put oxygen into the water. So those are some of the places you'll see. You'll find them. Another place is deep, and that's. Hold on a second. I gotta mute somebody. Okay. There we go. Is deep. Now, anybody not know what a thermocline is?
I do not.
Okay. A thermocline is the level of is kind of an oxygen line, if for lack of a better term. It's a line that holds the most amount of oxygen, or it's a temperature of water that holds the most amount of oxygen. When you're dropping a thermometer down and you reach, you'll start watching your temperature change, and then it gets colder and colder and colder, and then there's a place where it stays cold for several feet, and that's usually where your thermocline is. And the way you see it on the depth finder is you just turn your sensitivity way up, and you'll start seeing this line. And if you don't see the line, if your depth finder can't get that sensitive, then you just look for the level that the bait fish are at. And all the thermocline is a depth that holds the most oxygen. So if the bass can't find grass and they can't find current, they're going to find the oxygenated water. Now, the only problem is you got shallow lakes. I always try to remember to think about you guys that bank fish or fish these small ponds. Shallow lakes do not stratify. They do not get a thermocline per se. If they do, it's real shallow. Then what you're looking for is inactive fish, and if you don't have grass or anything else that's going to create your current, you're gonna look for those inactive fish on the bottom dragging a worm and stuff like that, and that gets into a whole new ball game of just finesse fishing. The biggest thing about summertime is look at it the way I look at it. Don't get your hopes up that you're going to smoke them, but when you do smoke them, it's an awesome day. When you get into some fish on a point and stuff like that, or and we'll get further into what to use and things like that. But when you get into a fish in an area, they're usually stacked in there, and if they're feeding, you're going to catch the snot out of them. If they're not feeding, you just think they're not there. But it's just one of those things. Let's see, current deep. I'm trying to run down my list. So what are some of the places? Say I'm fishing the thermocline. This is my technique for finding fish in the summertime. I go and I look for that thermocline. I look for that level where the most oxygen is. And just like the wintertime or any other time, I look for the level that those balls of bait fish are hanging if I have shad. If I don't have shad, then I'm looking for places where bluegill hang out. And I'm looking for that, that depth where those bluegill are hanging out, or the grass and things like that. But I take that thermocline and I run and I say, okay, the thermocline is. There's a lot of background noise, guys. I'm going to mute a bunch of you until I lose some background noise. There we go. I'll unmute you in a minute as soon as everything gets quiet. But I take that thermocline level and I go, okay, it's like right now on our lake, it's 16 feet deep. I'm going to go look for points and humps that are at that depth, 14 to 20 feet deep. And I'm going to start looking along those points and find something that's going to hold fish. Maybe just the point. There may be grass at that level. There may be brush piles at that level. And I'm looking for things that are going to hold those fish along that level of where that oxygenated water is. Another place fish like to hang out is other places I look are deep rock piles, deep humps. Who doesn't know what a hump is? Hold on, let me unmute everybody. Let's see if I can get everybody. Okay. I guess the Bassmaster wants to stay muted, right? All right, I'm good. I'm good with that. That's okay. But I'm looking for those rock piles and the just places in that level that are holding fish. So what do we let's see. What type of baits do you guys use in the summertime?
Carolina rig.
Okay.
Early on and late on, I like to throw an Alabama rig.
Okay. Okay. I'm not too much of an Alabama rig fan, but that has a whole lot to do with the politics for the people who or the wife of the person that designed it. So that gets into a whole different ballgame. Anybody else?
Well, I'm pretty much a finesse fisherman, so
Okay.
I'm a, that's kind of my, when I get into summer, that's what I do, along with topwater, frogs, poppers, early and late.
Yeah.
And then bass jig. Yeah, you talked the last time about Carolina rigging, and that's something I'm looking to get more into. In fact, I'm going to Minnesota here in 30 days or so. I'm going to be up there for a week, and that's going to be one of the things I'm going to be throwing up there. But for the most part, I'm fishing small, 100-acre, municipal and county and lakes and stuff like that. Unless I go with my son, then I'm in a boat. But otherwise, I'm fishing from the bank. So
okay. Okay, so Carolina rig. Let's talk about just fishing a worm in general. A lot of people say, ask me when do I fish creature baits and when do I fish worms? Well, I tend to fish creature baits in the cold weather and cold water or the warming water of the spring. Don't ask me why. I don't know. It's all a confidence thing. I could probably catch fish on creature baits in the summer, but I like using ribbon tail worms like the old monster or the mag 2 or straight tail worms like a finesse worm or a Cinco or something like that. Hold on, I can't mute for some reason. There we go.
When you say creature bait, now do you include a craw in that?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Talking more of the brush hogs and the
things with a bunch of little things coming off of them, like the lizards and the brush hogs.
I'm the same way. I've always thought of those more as early spring spawn, going after them during the spawn. Yeah. Lizards, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the reason I have a lot of confidence in those in the early spring is because there's those appendages, even when it's not moving, those appendages are moving in the water, so they tend to have a little bit more worth to me when the bass aren't really active. But in the summertime, I love a Cinco on a Carolina rig or a some type of a worm on a Carolina rig or a Texas rig and things like that. And like I said, it's just a confidence thing. And now, a Texas rig. When I say Texas rig, I've kind of gotten away from fishing a Texas rig unless I'm punching grass or I'm flipping and pitching heavy brush and things like that. That's when I use a Texas rig because, like I say, it's the all-terrain vehicle of bass fishing. It can get in and out of things that a lot of other things cannot. So one of the techniques I use right now, I'm fishing deep grass on my home lake. 14 to 23, 25 feet of water. Sometimes I can find it in 26. So I'm going along the creek, river channel, and things like that, and I'm looking for these points that are sticking out the furthest they could stick out, but still at that depth that the grass is growing. And and the grass isn't very tall, 10 inches maybe. So if it was 2 feet tall, I'd be flipping literally pitching a heavy Texas rig 14 feet deep, punching into that grass. Or if it was, any taller than 2 feet, I would be punching into that grass and doing the same thing I would do in the shallows, pitching in and shaking it and pulling it back out, and pitching it in, shaking it, and pulling it back out. Because they're going to get up underneath there and they're going to hide out just like they would if it was shallow. But because it's not, I'm throwing a Carolina rig with a longer leader, so that sinker gets down in the grass, but the bait tends to stay up above the grass. I bring it up. And if you've seen my Carolina rig, there's two different ways I'll pull a Carolina rig. Or if you've seen my Carolina rig video, is I'll either drag it up or I'll drag it to the side. And if you're fishing grass and dragging it to the side, all you're doing is just ripping that grass up with that sinker. So what I do with the Carolina rig is I'll pull that sinker out of that grass and let it sink back down into it. And what that does is as the sinker comes out, then the bait comes up too, and the sinker falls down, and the bait slowly falls down and settles down on top of the grass, giving the bass something to grab. So you got to remember that. I tend to forget sometimes because I want to feel that bottom. I mean, it's so bad. I want to feel that bottom and feel that bottom of that Carolina rig. And I forget that I'm fishing grass, and all I got to do is just hop it over top of it, and it's a lot more effective that way.
So at that depth that you're fishing, how heavy of a weight are you using?
I'm still using a ½ ounce, just because I know what a ½ ounce feels like. So if a bass picks it up and is swimming off of it, I know it's different, And so if I'm fishing 50 feet deep, then I'm throwing a 3/4 ounce, but I'm always throwing a ½ ounce. So,
Gene.
Yeah. Somebody asked me a question? Nope. But let's see. What's on next on my thing? Okay, other places that you can locate bass. I always pay attention. Like I said, I pay attention to the river channel, and a lot of river channels that have a lot of swings in them. Even creek channels that have a lot of swings in them. If you go over top of them with your depth finder, or if you're fishing from the bank and you're fishing from that steep side of the bank that has that river channel, a lot of those channels or that creek channel have a little ridge on the top of them. Or if it's an old river channel, I've noticed a lot of them have road beds that run along the side of them back when it was just the river, and then somebody created a cart path or a road right along the outside edge of them to get around them. And so I've noticed that those ridges that are right there on the edge of the channel, so the channel comes up and then there's a hump and then there's a drop again. Those ridges will hold a ton of bass. And so what I like to do with them is either Carolina rig them or crank them, and a lot of them will have rocks on them. If they didn't have rocks, then a lot of that soil would erode away anyway. So you'll find a lot of rock piles on those areas. Humps. Who doesn't know what a hump is? Anybody? It's basically, for those who are watching, it's basically an underwater island. And bass will get up on those humps, especially if there's brush or rocks or grass on top of them, and they'll sit there, and it's just a place to where they can ambush the bait fish as they're coming by, or they can ambush fish in the cover, and stuff like that. Let's see. Another way to attack these areas is crankbaits. I had 3 years ago, I didn't have any confidence in a crankbait. I knew how to fish one for the most part, but I spent a lot of time on Bass Resource and a lot of time asking questions about crankbaits and wanted to get to know all the little details and things on how to fish them. Now I don't get on the boat without one tied on to a rod somewhere. I mean, I will fish one until my arm falls off, because I know eventually I'm going to get into a school of fish, and that crankbait's going to turn them on, and I'm going to start catching fish and catching good ones. So right now, to attack those, I'm going to dive into crankbait fishing just because I want to. Crankbait fishing, especially deep cranking, is a skill that really you have to get out on the water just to understand what's going on. But the things that you're trying, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that crankbait to act like a bait fish feeding. You want to hit something. You want to change directions to get a bite. You want to tick the grass. You want to hit the bottom, bump the rocks, something. So a lot of deep water cranking is depth control. Okay, so how do you control the depth of your crankbait? First of all, you got when you buy your crankbait, you got a box that says what depth. Hopefully, it says what depth it's on. I don't buy a brand of crankbait if the box doesn't tell me what depth it's diving, because I don't want to go online and have to research how deep this crankbait dives with 10-pound line on. And that's the majority of them will tell you what depth it dives, and consider that depth how deep it dives with 10-pound test line. And so I take and I write that number on the bottom of my crankbait with a Sharpie, so I never forget it. So I pull it up out of the box, and I know exactly how deep it dives. And if I go up to 12-pound test, it's going to dive a little shallower. If I go to 8-pound test, it's going to dive deeper. So that's how you adjust the depth, not only with the crankbait, but with the pound test of your line. Mono doesn't dive as deep as fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon has less drag. It's all about adjustment. And so say I'm fishing a hump that has grass at 14 feet deep. I want that, and the grass is 12 inches tall. I want that crankbait, I want it to dive 13 feet deep. So I want it to ultimately chunk it out way past where I'm diving to, and I want to reel it in, and I want to tick the top of that grass and have it bump sediment and dust and whatever is on that grass, bump that grass off and cause that bass that's hanging out to go up and grab it. It's a reaction strike. It's a reaction bait. Another thing I like to do is I like to bump it into rocks and things like that. So if I got a rock pile down there, I want to just beat the snot out of those rocks and put as many dings in the lip of that crankbait as I possibly can and get those fish to react. And I change angles of that of the cast until I get bit. And a lot of times, if there's a school on those areas, I was watching a video on YouTube the other day of Fred Rumbanis over at Lake Eufaula, and he set up on this little point along the river channel, and he threw a crankbait. And I don't know how many times he threw it. He never said, but I'm pretty sure he threw it 10 or 15, 20 times. Same exact cast, bumping this one tree, and all of a sudden he started getting bit. And by the time, and once he got bit once, it was every cast. As fast as he could take it off, he was throwing right back out. And that's one of the things, once you get bit with a crankbait, get that fish off of that crankbait and chunk and make the exact same cast again. And see if there's a school of fish, you'll turn those fish on a lot of times, and you'll be able to just smack them. Just start catching one after the other. And by the end of it, he had caught a 9.5-pound bass and a whole bunch of 4s and 5s. You know, and he just had a heck of a limit on Eufaula, and so, you know, that's crankbait fishing. Another thing is if you're dragging the bottom, a lot of times people talk about dragging the bottom with a deep diving crankbait. What I like to try to make the crankbait look like is a bait fish feeding on the bottom. So once I hit the bottom and I feel that I'm on the bottom, I want that crankbait just to slowly tick along the bottom and come up a little bit and tick, 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 and come back and make it look like a bait fish feeding down on the bottom. And the way you do that is just with your speed control. Once you feel the bottom, you slow down, slow way down, and just change your speed real slow and then a little bit faster and then real slow and a little bit faster. And a lot of times that'll get you bit. A lot of people call that dredging. You're throwing a bait that dives in 10 feet of water that dives 15 feet, and you're dredging the bottom. And that's what you're trying to make it look like. That bill is kicking up just a little bit of silt off the bottom, and it attracts the bass and it gets bit. One thing people don't talk about is the fact that you can get bit on a deep diving crankbait even if it's not hitting something. And the way I do that is I change my speed. You know, if you guys have seen my rattle trap video, when I'm doing a rattle trap, it's fast and stop, fast and stop, fast and stop. Well, I don't do that with my deep diving crankbaits. I found that I don't get bit as much. What I do with my deep diving crankbaits is I'll get it down and I'll just start doing this and then slow down the retrieve. Speed up a little bit and slow down, but it's all about changing that, you know, changing that speed. I've tried popping my rod and making it jerk and stuff like that, like I do with a flat-sided crankbait, and I can't get bit that way. It's always just speed up and slow down, and then a fish will come up and grab it. I still want to be as close to the bottom as I can get, but you know, if I'm throwing something that I don't have a bait that dives deeper than 20 feet, so if I'm throwing to 24 feet, I'm just hoping and praying I can get a fish to come up, and that's how I get them to come up. So I'm going to stop for a second. Any questions?
Yeah, Gene. I was wondering with a deep diving crankbait, you know how the Striking has the 3 and 6, the XD series of crankbaits, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Would you recommend doing this? Because I noticed, I think what Strike King tried to do was make a smaller profile with a crankbait that'll still get down to the right depth. Mm-hmm. Would you recommend doing that digging on the bottom technique you're talking about with that particular model of crankbait?
Oh yeah, yeah. I love if my favorite crankbait is a discontinued Lucky Craft, and it's called the CB Mighty D2R, and I'll probably never find another one again since I just said that. But it's a small crankbait and it dives 8 feet deep, and I love that little thing, and it's only about maybe an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches long. Same thing. If you can downsize, especially in the summertime when the bait fish are real small, then you've won half the battle. And I hope they come out with one that'll dive really deep, that's really small. Because I'm a fan of Strike King crankbaits. Not sponsored by them, but I'm a fan of them because they have everything that I need, and I can get to know every little nuance about all their baits and know what that's going to do. So XDs are my favorite crankbait, really. So, any other questions?
Yeah. In your opinion, what would you say your favorite jerkbait is.
Oh, jerkbait. I've got several. Jerkbaits are something that you really have to have more than one model, because sometimes one, like with a rattle trap, sometimes one will work and sometimes another one, sometimes others will work. So the ones I keep in my box at all times especially in the summertime, if I'm throwing jerkbaits in the summertime, is a X-Wrap and a what's the other little rip bait? I love the Spro. The Spro jerk baits, the ones that Mike McClellan designed, and the Smithwick Rogues are really good. They're more of a early springtime bait, but I'll throw them in the summertime. I like the small ones though. I'll use the smallest ones I can find. For the reason what Trenton said was, that they those small ones, anything small, the bait fish are getting small. The baby, the baby bass are starting to get about that size, stuff like that. I like that size. I love a Lucky Craft pointer. I don't recommend going out and spend $1,000 on Lucky Crafts, but the ones I do have, they produce pretty good most of the year. And you're working them really fast, so you want one that you can work fast, that's not going to roll up on its side or going to jack up on you and stuff like that. So that's huge. Anybody else?
With crankbaits that have the lip on them, is 20 foot about realistically about as deep as you're going to get with one of them?
With most of them, yes. I mean, you can get deeper with the new 10XD that you have to have a freaking broom handle of a rod to cast and everything else. But I mean, they're 2 ounces, so it's like throwing a swim bait. Anyway, but you can get, like, there's a model of Lucky Craft that dives 22, 23 feet, and then you can get them deeper by getting down on your knees and sticking your rod way down in the water and cranking, or going to really light line. I wouldn't recommend going to lighter than 10 pound unless you're fishing a lake that has no snags and snarls and things like that to mess up your line, because you can lose a lot of crankbaits really quick, especially if you're using fluorocarbon. Another thing about fluorocarbon is make sure that you tie the knot right. I was fishing my first tournament in a couple of years a few weeks ago with Bobby, my fishing partner, and I had just caught it. I made the mistake of catching a fish on the first cast and never caught another one the rest of the night, but 20 casts into it, I made a big long chunk and that bait just went pew, and I never saw it again, because I remember tying that bait and pulling that fluorocarbon knot tight and feeling it burn as I was tightening it up, and I should have retied, and I was too lazy to do it. So
if you need to say the fish are at 30 foot, whatever, then what are your options then as far as a crankbait?
Oh gosh, I'll go along your lines. Finesse fishing. I'm going to throw a drop shot. I'm going to throw.
So you're out. The crankbaits are totally out then.
Totally out of the picture. If I'm fishing that deep, one of my techniques when I am fishing deep like that is something I learned from my father-in-law. His dad, my wife's grandfather, used to guide some of the deep lakes in Georgia, and they used to. Well, what they do, they'd take two worms on a Texas rig or whatever they were throwing, throw one of them out, and then throw the other one out, and bring one of them in. Now you can't do this in a tournament, but drag one of them in and fish it, and then throw it out and grab the other one and fish that one, because you're fishing so deep it takes so long to get it down. So you're doing one or the other, and one of them sitting on the bottom fishing for you while you're dragging the other one in anyway. So I'll do that with a jig and a Carolina rig if I'm, like a couple years ago when I was finding them 50 feet deep where a creek channel was coming into a river channel, back when our water quality was so bad that was the only place they could live to survive. So, but yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
The lipless crankbaits then. What's the best application for a lipless crankbait? I mean, is it a certain depth or?
It depends on how patient you are, really. Because if I'm going to fish it deeper than, say, 12 feet, I'm going to be yo-yoing it because I have no patience. A lot of people will put it on a really light line, throw it out, let it sink to the bottom, and then very slowly bring it back to the boat where, if it hits something, it starts to rattle, things like that. I don't have a lot of success with a lipless crankbait in the summertime. I know some people that do, and I've been accused of saying that I don't use it in the summertime because that's where I don't have this, I don't have any confidence in it. But once it starts to cool off and the fall kicks back in, I'm chunking it again, and they're biting. So maybe I ought to tie one on and try it out this summer or next summer and see if I can get confidence in it. But I just don't. And that another problem I have is I have trouble controlling the depth when I'm fishing that deep. So it's all a matter of what you want to try, really. And if somebody catches stuff on a rattle trap in the summertime, let me know, and let me know how you're doing it so I can try to go out and try it myself. So,
Gene, while we're talking about lipless crankbaits, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as I've heard plenty of people. Like I saw a video. I believe it was Timmy Horton. He was ripping lipless crankbaits, the striking red eye shad over grass flats. He was just fishing, just looking for bass. I kind of just sitting inside grass flats. Have you ever done anything similar to that?
Oh yeah. Do you remember how deep he was fishing? Did he say they were shallow or deep?
They're about deep.
Okay. So deep for Timmy Horton, I'm guessing, since he grew up on Wilson Lake, is pretty deep. So
yeah.
Let's say the one time in the late summer that I did have a good rattle trap bite was when I was fishing a grass flat that was probably 12 to 15 feet deep on the bottom, and the grass came up about 2 feet, and then it would have little stick ups that went up 2 feet further. And I would take a lipless crank, and I think it was a Spro Ruku shad at the time. And this was before 7-to-1 gear ratios. And I was letting it sink down to the depth of those single stick-ups. And I was literally burning this 6-3-to-1 gear ratio as fast as I could and holding my rod up really high. So I'd tick the top of that grass, and I was getting killed on that bait. And what Timmy was probably doing was he was probably throwing it out, letting it sink into the grass or a little bit into the grass, and the same sort of deal, ripping the lipless out of the grass, getting a reaction strike.
Yeah.
And there is nothing better when it comes to crankbaits and grass than a lipless crankbait ripping through the grass, because it comes right out. I mean, but it depends on the type of grass too, like I always say. He was probably throwing in hydrilla, and hydrilla rips real easy. You get it hung in there, you pop it out, and the hydrilla basically just explodes like a firecracker, and that bait comes out, and the bass is sitting right there like, whoa, food, and so, and that's what they do. They'll grab it, and that's I'm glad you said that, because I totally forgot about that bite that I had, and it was a summertime bite. It was a late summer, early September here in Georgia, and it was burning a rattle trap through the grass and just ripping it. And the reason I held my rod up high and I'd have it out at about 10 o'clock is every time I'd get caught in the grass, I just had to pop my rod back really quick and just keep reeling, and that popping that out would rip it out of that grass. So, anybody else?
What would you say about fishing a new pond that you've never fished before in the summer?
In the summertime, the same thing. I would go looking for the current. Where is that water coming in at, and is there anything stirring that water up, or is it a windy day? I love windy days on small ponds because that stirs up the oxygen, and it gets the fish a little bit active. So or after a nice big rainstorm, I'll go out and if the lake's not muddy, I'll go out and I'll try to fish it, because that rain has stirred up an oxygen in that pond. But I'm looking for current. Where's the wind blowing up against, or what water's running into it. It's all about the oxygen. If the bass can't breathe, they're going to get lethargic, just like they do in the wintertime. And it's going to be, finessing them and slow pulling a little worm and hoping that, you get it in front of their nose and wiggle it enough to get them to open up their mouth. But if you got some current coming in, then that's where I'd start, and then I'd work my way out from there. So. Who loves Topwater?
I do.
Everybody loves Topwater.
Yeah. So let's talk about Topwater in the summertime. Everybody talks about early in the morning, late in the evening, and all night long. Okay. So those are the best times to fish Topwater. But if you've got a lake that's got matted grass, that trumps it, because those bass are in that grass and there's oxygen there, so they're not going to be deep, and that's your shallow bite. So a topwater frog, be it a little, a buzz frog like a horny toad or a ribbit or whatever, or you know, a hollow body frog, which are my favorites because you can fish them slower and finesse them and things like that. But you know, just get into that grass. You know, get in those lily pads, get into whatever shallow grass and cover. As long as there's oxygen, the bass are going to be there. And also understand again that in that grass, you know, if you want to do something that mimics a bluegill, you know, you'll probably catch fish, or mimics a hollow body frog. Now, everybody talks, you know, you got all these really beautiful hollow body frogs, these coppers, you know, live target frogs, and these you know, the spro frogs and things like that, and they catch a whole lot of fishermen. I mean, those paint jobs are beautiful, and but you know, which ones are going to catch the most fish for you? And what I always do is, if they don't have a packaging that I can turn it over and see what the belly color is, I'm not going to buy it because I don't know what that belly is. You know, I remember when Live Target first came out, I went to ICAST, just happened to be there with Bass Resource, and I got to see them, and I said, well, what other different? All they had were the white bottoms. I said, what other color bottoms do you have? And they didn't have any at the time, so I instantly became an anti-live target frog guy until they came out with different colored bottoms. You know, and the three color bottoms I like is a black or a brown bottom. I call it a dark bottom, a white bottom, and then yellow. I don't really stray too much off of the yellow bottoms because for some reason the same color yellow, not the chartreuse, but like a school bus yellow color, like on this Duckett shirt, they, for some reason, most of the time I'm fishing that, they absolutely annihilate that color. And I can't explain why. That's my favorite color. And then if it's cloudy, what I typically do is I'll hold the bait and I'll hold it up above my head and I'll look at it against the sky. And if it's a cloudy day, that white one does not work. I'll go to a dark colored one, or I'll go to the yellow one. If it's a sunny day, any one of those colors will work, but it's probably going to be the lighter or the yellow one. You know, so I love to fish them. I absolutely love to fish them, but you got to understand what the bass are looking at, what they see. You know, another thing I do when I'm choosing one is I want to know if it walks good. I love to walk a frog. It's difficult to do and hard to learn, but once you learn how to do it and get that little rhythm and cadence down, then the fishing is phenomenal. The bass will come up and they'll just annihilate it. And I've got a video about how to walk a frog. It's one of my old ones, so it probably looks crappy, but it shows the difference in how to walk a frog and how to walk a spook type bait or a cigar bait or whatever they call them, a topwater plug. It's a totally different thing, you know. So now the buzz frogs, for instance, all the horny toads and things like that. Oh wait, let's go back. Other things I'll use with those topwater frogs is you got to make sure you got braided line. You're fishing in that heavy grass, and you, a lot of times once you get that bite and that fish takes it down and you wait that 2 or 3 seconds before you set the hook, they've buried you in a wad of grass that you can't get them out of. And it doesn't take much for you to break off, you know, even 20-pound mono or fluorocarbon. And fluorocarbon you shouldn't be using for topwater anyway because it sinks. But you know, that braided line will rip right through that grass a lot of times and will help you get that fish out. 50-pound braid on everything, hollow body or a buzz frog. Don't really worry about them seeing the line because you're working it, and like I said, it's a reaction strike. They're not really paying much attention to the line anyway, unless it's super clear water and you're not fishing matted stuff. So now let's go back. Let's go talk about horny toads and those buzz frogs. How many of us have had problems with those flipping over upside down?
Oh,
This one, rivet frogs. That.
Yep. And a lot of times, it's hard. It's a hard solution, but you know, I like these little, and I don't know if I have them with me anymore. I like the weighted hooks with the little screw locks on the end.
The motor hooks.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me see if I got a bag of them. I should have some right over here. My wife calls me a hoarder, but
you can never have much fishing stuff.
Yeah, I know it.
There you go.
But when you put that weighted hook on there, it doesn't allow you to go as slow though. You have to speed up, don't you?
Yep.
You have to hold up for a little bit. You can.
Yeah, you have to.
Don't you want to go as slow as possible though?
It depends on what the fish want, really.
Okay.
The thing I like about Moaners is they have some really, really light, and this is the wrong kind of hook, but it's kind of they go all the way down to 1/8 of an ounce and 1/16 of an ounce on their hook.
Okay.
So, and that's not a whole lot of weight, really.
No, that's not bad.
But it's enough to turn that frog over. Now, the frogs that I love to use, and guys know me in Rage Tail, but those Rage frogs, they turn if you hook them exactly the way they tell you to, go on their website, they tell you exactly the size hook to use, and everything else. I think it's a 5/0 wide gap hook. If you hook it right, it's going to roll over on its belly every time, just because of the way it's shaped. So
I was fixing with that today. I've never had an issue with it besides today. I don't know why today.
You weren't doing anything different?
No, it's the same. Maybe I was just off by a little bit on how straight it was, but it was a huge 5/0 hook. Everything was usual.
Yeah.
But today, about 4 or 5 casts, it was starting to flip over backwards.
Another thing might also be your where your knot is located on your hook. A lot of times, if that knot slides down on that eye a little bit and is not up high, it'll cause that hook to flip over or not to flip over. So pay attention to where that is. I've noticed that on several different baits. If you're ever having a problem if you're tying directly to a crankbait for some reason, a lot of times it's where that hook is located or where that knot is located on that hook eye. So.
Now I got a question. It's kind of long though. But,
That's right.
This morning I was over at the reservoir like I was telling you earlier. But I was fishing with the Rage Toad, and then I did the Popar and then the Spook. And I never got a bite. And I was there way before sunset, so it was about 45 minutes of fishing. And then I went to the Carolina rig, and I started, and then wherever they were hitting, as far as like I could see them jumping up and hitting like little insects, I was getting them with the Carolina rig.
Mm-hmm.
But then after about an hour and a half, 2 hours of fishing with the Carolina rig and actually like slaying them pretty good, they stopped biting like the whole time. And then I had to start throwing deep, and I finally started getting deep, like throwing it about 80, 90 feet, and I was getting them basically right when it started to fall.
Mm-hmm.
What is the transition? Is there a transition when they feed from shallow in the morning in summer to when they go out deep? Is there like a time or?
It has a lot to do with light penetration, light angle, and available cover. One of the coolest things I learned fishing that dang stocked private lake up in North Carolina was I learned about migration during the heat of the summer. And with that, you could pretty much set your clock to it, but it was all about light angle. As the light came up and the light hit the water, that shallow water bite would stop. I mean, it was gone.
Yeah, because once the sun came over the mountain, and about 30 minutes later, it shut off that shallow bite.
Yep, and the fish start to move out, and they're not necessarily feeding. You may catch 1 or 2 of them, but they're transitioning, and they're heading out towards either that deeper water or that heavy cover.
Gotcha.
And that's why I like heavy cover, is because they'll stay shallow longer. Goodness gracious, I ate too much. Sorry, guys. We had Mexican tonight. They'll head deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they'll get into that creek channel. And it doesn't take a bass very long to get rid of some air out of his swim bladder to go deep. So that transition it's quick, but they'll bite during that period of time because it's not that big of a shock to them, and it's not that much work for them. Yeah. But when they're coming deep to shallow, they have to fill up that air bladder, and it takes a little bit of time. And on that lake in North Carolina, I noticed like the light as the sun was going down at about 5:30, that bite would stop. And what would happen? Who's got their radio on? Hold on. He finds that sperm cells are still present. Somebody's talking about sperm cells still present. But I noticed that as the sun, it's about 5:30, the bite in the creek channel or in the channel that ran through the lake would stop, and about a half hour later, the topwater bite was on. And what was happening is those fish were filling up their swim bladder, and they were slowly getting to where they were neutrally buoyant shallow.
Gotcha.
And so during that period of time, we weren't catching very many fish. And so shallow to deep, they can go fast. Deep to shallow, it's a little bit slower transition, and it's all about light
The thing
penetration.
that told me to go deeper was the fish were blowing up on insects shallow right when I got there, so I was doing the topwater, and then I did Carolina shallow. I was getting hit, and then the next thing you know, all these fish are jumping out in the middle of the reservoir. They're not even by the shallows anymore. So it kind of told me that they're further out and transitioning.
Yep.
I was wondering when that, and that's when I started getting hit way further out, not by shore anymore.
And it was probably the same exact school of fish too, and like they were just moving out because the sun was getting, and they were still wanting to feed, come up and school as we call it.
Well, I was on the steepest point there is, and they were going far out.
Yep. And so that's and that's typically even when I'm fishing points. If I'm catching really good fish early in the morning, real shallow up on a point or real shallow, I'm going to look for those features that are going to that those fish are going to follow out deep, be it a point or grass, a grass flat or something like that. And those fish, as the sun gets higher, those fish are going to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm going to try to follow them. I'm not very good at it. There's a lot of guys that are a lot better at it than I am. But I'm going to try to follow them out as they go deeper and deeper, all the way out to where they're comfortable. It's all about safety and oxygen. They want to feel safe, but they want to be able to live. So they're going to get out there deep where they can still feed and still survive. Really,
it was like a 5 or 10 minute transition period when they're busting shallow to busting deep. So.
Yep. Now another option for summertime fishing is nighttime fishing. Okay, and that brings that's a whole different ball of wax. I love night tournaments, and when I say night tournaments, they start at about 6:30 in the afternoon, and they go till 11 or 12 o'clock, depending on which lake. If I really enjoyed fishing night tournament, if I really had enough money to travel and buy gas and stuff like that, around here in Georgia, I could fish a night tournament every single night, but Thursday night. But Thursday night, but I'd spend more money in gas than I made fishing tournaments anyway, so I don't do it. But it's the thing people think about, or the things people ask me about night fishing is, what baits do I use? The one thing that always pops into my head is what I see about a lot of pictures of people holding fish night fishing. I don't know why my camera's not coming up like that. Is the jitterbug, topwater baits, something that makes surface action, because they're the funnest to catch fish on, and so. That's one thing, topwater. But I throw the same things at night that I do in the daytime. I throw a Texas rig worm. I throw a Carolina rig worm. And I still get bit on them. I like throwing dark colored worms, be it a June bug or something like that, at night, and I still get bit on them. And so it's, I may shorten the leader on my Carolina rig. If I'm fishing a real long 24, 25-inch leader, I may shorten it a little bit, so if the bass hears that weight banging up against the rocks or whatever I'm fishing, then the bait's not too far behind it. That may be one thing that I do at nighttime. But it's all in your head. First of all, you can't see where you're casting. So I try to stay as far away from trees as I possibly can, and hope the bass stay off the banks and stuff like that. I've lost so many buzz baits in trees in night tournaments. So and I want to fish. I hate getting snagged, so I'm going to fish a Carolina rig with my nice little, thin Carolina rig weight that I showed you guys last week or 2 weeks ago. The tungsten weight that I'm trying to get somebody to make for me. But I'm just, the biggest thing I try to pound into people's heads is it's all in your head. All you have to do is just fish what you're fishing during the day, and you'll catch fish on it. Crankbaits, deep crankbaits. The fish can feel that vibration. I don't change much is the thing, and you'll still catch fish. You change your location from where you were fishing during the day, which is deep, to back up shallow on the hump, shallow on the points, back up in the brush, things like that. But I'm still going to fish the same stuff, because the fish have ways of locating their food at dark, and those little bait fish don't make a whole lot of noise. So,
my favorite nighttime bait is the spinnerbait. Spinnerbait with a big old Colorado blade. In fact, I must have 20 of them. I don't know if they even still make them. Red King made this this lure called the Midnight Rattler.
Mm-hmm. It had a little rattle in the blade.
Hammered, short-armed, hammered Colorado blade, and I got black and red. That's all I throw. And when you bring that thing through the water, you would think you have a crankbait, a white wobble crankbait. I mean, you can just feel that thing. It feels like it feels like a fish coming through the water, and you can, whether you feel the bite or not. As soon as you feel that vibration stop, just set the hook because they're there.
Yeah.
You're either hooked up or you're on. And that's my absolute favorite thing to throw at night. But I like to fish the topwater too, but. I find that the darker the night, the better too. But those fishing that topwater at night can just scare the crap out of you because they just. Because I'm a bank fisherman for one. So you're sitting there, you can be halfway lulled yourself to sleep, and all of a sudden, boom! You got to be ready for it. Because that's, honestly, the best fishing I ever have is fishing after midnight.
Yeah, and you know what? That brings up a good point too. A lot of times in these night tournaments, there's a lull, right? As it gets too dark to see, there's a time where you just don't get a lot of bites. And I don't know if the fish are trying to get acclimated to whatever, but for some reason, there's about a 10, 20, or 30-minute lull. A lot of the night tournaments I used to fish where you wouldn't expect a bite, so you just fished just to be fishing and wait for that bite to come back. But Corey, that reminded me a lot of when I used to trout fish, fly fish. One of my favorite things to do were fish for big browns in a new moon night, so there was no light, and you'd go wading through these big wide creeks or rivers as they called them out west with a topwater rat or a topwater some type of a topwater rat tied hair bait. And you just were blind casting and just stripping and just waiting for it to sound like somebody threw an old tire into the water. And you heard that and you set the hook, and then the fight was on for 15 minutes and you had no clue where you were going or what you were doing. And it was just a fun battle, but it scared the snot out of you. It just really change your pants at the end of the day type stuff. It was awesome. It was one of the funnest couple of days I ever had was doing that. But anyway, back on topic. Enough trout fishing. Anybody else have a favorite nighttime bait?
Gene, like you were just saying about when you're trout fishing.
Yeah.
I have it sitting right here. I have a custom wooden rack, and I love to throw it on Gunnersville. I'm actually going to Gunnersville in a week or two, but I like to throw this big custom rack.
I've seen those. I don't know where I've seen them, but I've seen them somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah, that thing is huge.
Yeah, they really are.
It looks like a
it catches huge fish. It catches huge fish.
What baseball bat do you cast that thing with?
I actually throw it on my Alabama rig rod.
Okay. Extra heavy rod.
Yeah, and I had a guy who made me a custom rod for rats one time. It was just like an Alabama rig rod. It had a little bit of extra tip on it, but this is like one of my favorite baits to throw at night, and I feel like I can throw this in a lot of different places because it has a lot of action.
Yep.
And it turns a lot of water because it has I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it has a
bill. Yep.
Yeah, a really big lip on there, and it pushes a lot of water.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's all. I bet you, man, that's one of those just like a swim bait. You chunk it for just one bite. You want that one big bite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I caught I think my second biggest fish on Gunnersville with that rat, and I had another one. It was just like it though, but it was made by a different person. It was a 9.6, I think it was, up at Gunnersville.
Yeah, I got a $125 crankbait or swim bait at the bottom of Gunnersville somewhere.
I'll go find it.
Yeah, it was a bull shad that I had custom painted by Dwayne Beatty, and And
Oh,
the
man.
one time I made the mistake of tying it on to braid. Don't ever fish heavy baits. For me, if I get I get a backlash with braid because I'm always chunking the baits as hard as I can. And if you get that instant stop, and that heavy bait will pop 60-pound braid.
Yes.
But 20-pound fluorocarbon and stuff like that has enough stretch to absorb that shock. And so I don't throw heavy baits on braid anymore. Not even Alabama rig. It's all fluorocarbon or monofilament or something 20-pound test or heavier. So
Do you just use like the 20-pound leader with fluorocarbon, or like do you have like a braid backing? Do you ever use
no,
that?
on my big rods like my jig rods and stuff like that, I try
Mm-hmm.
to just use straight fluorocarbon. I know it's expensive, but I just never know how far out you got to cast and stuff like that. So, and that heavy line on those shallow spools that I have, I'll chunk a Alabama rig and almost spool it out anyway. So there's no reason to have a backing. At least for me, it wouldn't. So, it's one of those personal preference things. One of the things I haven't touched on, I forgot to touch on, is precautions in the summertime. I'm almost 40 years old.
Dehydration.
And I know Corey is pushing it up in years, and we always worry about that skin cancer that we can get from being in the sun for so long, and so I have a video about how to protect yourself in the sun, but it's so important. Who was it? I read a little article about Kelly Jordan having skin cancer cut off of his back a couple years ago, and he's a good friend of my dentist, and I've met Kelly and talked to him several times through my dentist and through Bass Resource and things like that. But he's just a downright good guy, and at this point in time he was just gotten married and his wife is expecting a baby, and here he is with skin cancer, and so we worry about that kind of stuff. So protect yourself from the sun, be it with a buff around your head, protect the top of your ears. My wife's grandfather died from skin cancer, and it started right here at his ears and went into his lymph nodes, and then it wasn't long after that. And so, put sunscreen on your ears, protect your skin, and wear long sleeves. Those expensive shirts that Columbia and all those other companies make are well worth the money when you talk about what's going to happen further down the road. So, that I'm a firm believer. You'll see me with my buff on a lot, and I'm almost always in long sleeves now. I love wearing short sleeves around the house and when I'm working in the yard and stuff like that. But when I'm out fishing, I'm gonna have long sleeves on every time, or at least try to. So.
Yeah, like right now, I wear my buff constantly.
Yeah.
I wear my buff not just only when I'm fishing. I wear my buff when I'm out doing yard work, when I'm playing baseball. Because just like you said, and I have a darker skin tone, but the risk is still there.
Oh yeah, it is. It is. I mean, my best friend going in the Army, he was from downtown D.C. Orlando Stevenson is his name. Love him to death. And we were brothers from another mother going through basic training so close that our drill sergeants got us mixed up. And it amazed me. This is when I grew up around a lot of African Americans and had 50-50, but I never really got that close with them. I mean, just best friend close. I was friends with them, but never was best friend close. And we'd go to the pool and hang out during our break time and stuff like that. And I noticed his skin color getting darker and darker. He said, "Yeah, man, we tan too." I'm like, "Oh, okay." The light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, "Duh." Just one of those ignorant things you just don't really think about, And so, but same thing is African Americans need to worry about that too. And those buffs, man, they're worth the money. They're not expensive, and a lot of them are pretty cool. I have one that looks like the Taliban scarf. So when I'm going down the lake with it totally wrapped around my face, I get funny looks from all the old geezers in their boats. It's pretty cool.
Thanks, Dean. I got to run.
Okay, take it easy, Corey.
We'll see you.
All right. Let's see. Other things, night precautions. One thing, especially when you guys are fishing nighttime tournaments on boats, and I know eventually you bank fishermen are going to get to that point too, where you're in a boat with somebody and you're able to fish either night tournaments, pot tournaments, or something like that. Especially if they're in your area, and that should be a goal of yours too, because they're a blast. But before it gets dark, make sure the deck of the boat's clean. Start putting rods away, put things away that you're going to trip on in the middle of the night. If you have these new LED lights are really cool, but make sure that they don't blind you. Make sure they're not so bright. We got one guy that has them all over his boat, and it's a blinding boat. I don't see how he can fish. But basically just clean up the deck. I do this with clients. Make sure the deck is clean because you don't want people tripping over them. You don't want your rods to break, and you don't want to fall in the lake. And you don't want things that fly in your face as you're going 60 miles an hour down the lake. That's the biggest thing. And always wear your life jacket. That's my disclaimer anyway. But always make sure you have your life jacket on. You hear stories every single week on Bass Resource about people who life jacket either saved their life or would have if they've been wearing it. My fishing partner Bobby got thrown out of the boat in 50-something degree water, and if somebody had not seen him fall out of the boat, he wouldn't be here because he wasn't wearing his life jacket. And his lower unit fell off of his boat in the middle of nowhere. And when that happens, your boat makes a turn, and it made a turn and ejected him right out of the boat. And so, and he was lucky. He was really lucky. Yeah, seriously. I was down 30 miles. I was down 30 miles south of him fishing. There was no way I could have gotten up there. So.
I was just at Eufaula at a tournament, and this wasn't at my tournament. Some other guys were weighing in down at the marina where we were, and one of the guys fell out of the boat. This was last month, so it wasn't freezing cold water or anything, but the guy's steering cable snapped, and the boat took a hard left turn, and it literally did the same thing you're talking about. I just ejected him out the boat.
Yep. And then you just never know when that kind of crap's going to happen. It's just it worries me to death. I try to always have my life jacket hooked up to the kill switch and everything because you never know. And that's a huge thing. And if your lower unit falls off like it did with him, you no longer have a step to step up on to get in the boat. And it was a Ranger, so it didn't have a ladder or anything else. So he needed help getting up into his boat. And 54, I think it was 54, 55, maybe. It was just pre-spawn, so it may have been high 50s, but that's still cold enough to kill you in no time, with hypothermia. So, if that guy had not seen him, he wouldn't be here. And he's got 3 kids and is a preacher of a huge church. So he, a lot for him to lose. He doesn't go anywhere without his life jacket anymore. I tell you that. So anyway, let's see. I've gone down my whole list of summertime fishing. Anybody got questions?
Yeah. What would you say about jig fishing in the summer? Football jig.
I typically don't, but I know a lot of people that do. And if I'm throwing a jig, I'm throwing it into rock piles, deep rock piles, is what I like to fish. I've got a couple of spots on my home lake. There's not a whole lot of deep rock, but I'm going to throw a football head jig if it's big chunk rock, or I'm going to drop shot and stuff like that if it's deep rock. I'm going to fish it. I'm going to start off fishing it really slow, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to speed it up and speed it up and speed it up until I get bit or until I lose confidence in it, and I'm going to go to something else. But I love a black and blue jig in the summertime. Another thing I didn't cover was jigs under docks and things like that, skipping docks. If you've got a lot of current running in past these deep docks, skipping docks with jigs and letting them sink to the bottom, a couple shakes and pull it back out. That's huge. That's huge on a couple of on those type of lakes. But yeah, jigs are the bigger the better in the summertime. I don't go to a finessey jig until it gets cold, but I want a big honking jig to get their attention. So, and me being me, I love those living rubber jigs, but that's all I fish anyway. It's all I make and all I fish. So, good question. One thing I didn't cover is drop shot. Drop shot's a huge summertime bait.
Oh God.
All right, Trenton. I love it because I'll keep one locked and loaded on my boat, and I'll keep an eye on my depth finder. But even when you're bank fishing, it's something that can just you can chunk a mile and you can let it sink down and just slowly work it back to the boat and cover all the area that you can that you need to. And it's a finessey type deal. So if they're a little turned off, you can usually get bit, or at least find where the fish are to adjust for what you want to do. So love a drop shot.
What baits do you usually fish on a drop shot? Because I've seen people fishing jerk shads and stuff like that, just small, tiny jerk shads and stuff.
Yep, I started out when the bait fish are really small in the summertime. I like to use those. They're called tiny flukes. and they're literally 1.25 inches long, and they're hard to find, but you can usually order them somewhere. Or the old Sluggos make one about that size. I'll even drop shot I'll put a tiny hook on and drop shot a crappie jig, a white crappie jig. But typically, what I'm doing in the summertime is I'm drop shotting the worm that was designed for the drop shot, and that's a robo worm. You know, in various colors, be it pink or, you know, or black or green, or the Aaron's Magic color is my favorite color. And the reason I say it was designed for a drop shot, and I mentioned this on the last video, is that it's got salt just on the bottom layer of plastic. So it makes that, what that little bit of salt does, makes that plastic neutrally buoyant, or that worm neutrally buoyant, and it will stick out better and it'll shake better. Biggest thing about a drop shot, though, is you remember when you shake it, don't shake it on a tight line, shake it on a slack line. And even that slack line shaking or moving will cause that worm to twitch and quiver. So that's a big thing when you're finesse fishing, is you don't really want to move your bait much. You just want it to shake. You want it to have a little bit of action. So another things I'll throw is a finesse worm and a trick worm, because there's a lot of finesse worm colors that I like to fish in certain lakes that robo worm doesn't make. So you know, it just depends. But that's the majority of what I'm throwing. I've been known to throw a dang old monster on a drop shot. You know, a big, huge 11-inch worm on a drop shot. I mean, if that's what I feel like they want to bite, I'm going to put it on a drop shot and drop it down in front of their nose and see if they bite it. I will change a hook on that, because you know, you got that big thick plastic, you won't really get the hook set a lot. But you know, just anything, but mainly the straight worms, straight tail worms, and things like that. So,
how far do you keep your bait from the bottom?
On a drop shot, I start off at about 18 inches, but if I'm in a boat and I can see how high they are off the bottom, if I'm seeing fish on the bottom, I'll try to match that depth or get a little bit above it. But you also got to understand, when you're looking at a fish finder, because of the cone signal that comes out of a fish finder, a lot of times what you see as the bottom really isn't. It's another 6 inches down, and it's something you just have to kind of, you drop a bait down and see it disappear into the bottom, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I know that's 12 inches up, but I still can't see my bait. So I'll start with 15 or 18 inches, and I'll go up. If I see the fish on the bottom, or if I can see them suspended off the bottom, I'll actually go up to 18 inches. But if I know there's fish down there and I can't see them, I'm going to go less than 15 or 18 inches. So, and I've been known to go as little as 4 inches if I know they're hugging the bottom and I just want to shake it in front of their nose. That's a wintertime thing I do. It's not a summertime thing.
Now, when you're fishing your regular, like, 7-inch robo worm, are you using just the drop shot hooks, or are you using like a 1/0 straight shank hook?
I'm usually using the either a mosquito hook, or an octopus hook. Now, not an octopus round, or what do they call it, circle hook, octopus circle hook, but an octopus hook. There's a big difference in how you set the hook on those two. So I got to ask that question on YouTube not too long ago. Why was I using octopus hook? When I realized the guy was talking about an octopus circle hook, and so I kind of had to set him a little bit straight on that. Was that it's, you know, an octopus hook, you can still set the hook pretty good, but with a circle hook, you just have to reel into them. So it's a huge difference between two. So a mosquito hook or an octopus hook are the two I use. What is it? Gamakatsu sells one that's a drop shot hook.
That's the one I use.
Yeah, and that's a mosquito hook, is all that is. You know, it's and the difference is just the angle of the eye according to the shank of the hook is all the difference is. So.
Now, when you say circle hook, are you talking about the hooks that have like the shank of, well, not the shank, but the point of the hook, it kind of bends in a little bit more?
Yep, I don't use them. They're so easy to lose a fish, and you don't really need them on a drop shot because they don't typically swallow those. What the circle hook was designed to prevent fish from swallowing the hook. And what it is if they swallow the hook down, especially in saltwater, if they swallow the hook down and you feel the bite, if you just start reeling and put pressure on them and let the fish set the hook itself, what happens is that hook pops out of the gut of the fish and works its way to the corner of the mouth and gets a perfect hook set in the corner of the mouth every time. And that's ideal for a lot of things, but when you're fishing drop shot and bass fishing, it's not. You're especially with a drop shot, it's not going to get hung up. So.
Hey, Fluke, I got a question for you.
Yeah, man.
What is your thought on drop shotting and like current and stuff like that?
I typically, because bass don't typically like current, like a trout will sit on the bottom,
smallmouth
like
up here, so.
Yeah, so smallmouth, you just have to be careful what weight you use and be ready to lose a whole lot of them. But
yeah.
Dude, I don't fish a lot of smallmouth, but I've growing up trout fishing and stuff like that, I understand how current flows through and over rocks and things like that. If you're gonna do that, use those little long cylindrical drop shot weights, because if you do get hung, they tend to come out easier than the round ones or the teardrop ones. But just understand, you better have a pocket full of them, because when I'm fishing riprap and things like that, I always make sure I got a bunch, because I'm gonna break that weight off and have to hook another one on. So
should you just let it like drift, or should you put any action on it at all?
I'm gonna try to get that weight down to the bottom, to where into the hole that I think the fish are at, or into that eddy where I think the fish are hanging out, and I'm just gonna sit there and sink it. So,
So I've been noticing it just kind of ticks the rocks as it drifts along, and then occasionally like a bit, but I'm not sure whether to shake the rod at all or just let it drift. So.
Yeah, and now if I don't have a pocket full of sinkers, I'm gonna throw it out there, and I'm gonna try to stay in contact with it and work it almost kind of like a crankbait, but just kind of what was I talking about? Doug taking a selfie kind of threw me off.
I'm reading. I'm actually reading your YouTube questions.
Oh, okay, cool. I need somebody to do that, because I can't do that and listen to you guys' questions at the same time. But anyway, I'll stay in contact with it and try to feel that bait bouncing off the rocks, and try not to let it settle down in the rocks. That's if they're really active.
Yeah.
And if they're smallmouth, man, they're pretty active. They're a fireball of a fish anyway. But I can count on my fingers and toes how many smallmouth I've caught in my life. So I'm not the smallmouth guru. I promise you that.
Yeah, Gene, that's what I was gonna ask you. What are smallmouth like? Because I live in Alabama, live in Birmingham. So what are smallmouth like over there in Georgia? Like, how many lakes do you have over there that have smallmouth?
There are places here in Georgia that people have brought smallmouth here and gone to jail because of it. But there's smallmouth in the rivers here.
Wow.
And the smallmouth are great. I've got them right behind the house, but I got to get a kayak to get into the rapids where they like to hang out. I had a buddy of mine a few years ago show me a picture of a 5-pound smallie that he caught right behind my house. And so it blew my mind. I just haven't been out there to fish for them. But up north they have them, but they're just rare. They're few and far between. The fish we have around here that are like smallmouth, but they aren't, are called shoal bass. And they live in the river systems in central Georgia. And if you hold them up, they look like a cross between the body shape of a spotted bass with the markings of a smallmouth. And so they're a great fish. People throw swim baits up and down the rivers and kayaks all the time catching them in central Georgia and some of the lakes over on the west side of Georgia. So not very many places for smallmouth. I have to go up where you are to catch smallmouth. I love Tennessee River. It's my favorite river in the whole country. And
I like Wilson Lake for it too.
Yep, I caught a bunch in Wilson this spring, and so I fished those ledges with jigs and just absolutely loved catching smallmouth in the big. That's my mystery tackle box slam video that I did over in Alabama was on Wilson Lake, fishing the ledges. So
you have to change a lot of your techniques or different baits for going from largemouth to smallmouth. I've never fished for smallmouth, but back in my hometown, they have some rivers and some other stuff. Do you have to change too much or no?
You just have to change locations. Smallmouth like current more, and so they'll be closer into the current. They like rocks more and stuff like that. So when I was fishing Pickwick 2 years ago, if I wanted to catch smallmouth, I had to go to the other side of the lake that had more rocks and more current flowing through it. So, and they have those big huge tails, and so they can withstand a lot more current than the largemouth does.
Like a little bit deeper water too.
Yeah, and look. They tend to suspend more too. Same with spotted bass. Spotted bass will suspend more. So with each species, you just kind of have to change your locations a little bit, you know. And
so much bait.
No, I haven't noticed that. I mean, I still caught smallmouth on Carolina rigs and jigs and spinner baits and same things I would.
All like the YouTube videos I've watched for smallmouth, they go with all these bright and color.
Yeah, bubblegum pink works good.
Yeah, and they're an aggressive fish, so I use that bubblegum color for spotted bass, so I can imagine the smallmouth are the same way. Yeah. I just need to get more confident or more experience doing that. I just don't live close enough to it to get that. So, but I got a client up in Massachusetts. If he's watching this right now, he's saying, "Well, come up here." He wants me to come up there and fish in Massachusetts with him. So, one of these days. Too many Yankees up there. Oh, kidding. But let's see. I want to do this for about 15 more minutes. Any more questions? Anyone? Bueller?
What are your thoughts about wacky rigging, just like the standard Senko? During summer.
Doug, you remember what I say about a Senko? It's a turd on a hook. I'd rather watch. Yep, I'd rather watch paint dry. But fishing a Senko, the only time I will fish a Senko and wacky rig it is when I'm skipping docks, because it is an awesome skipping bait. And I'm going to throw it on a spinning rod with 15-pound test on it, and I'm just going to skip underneath docks and hold on tight. One thing that I learned the hard way is when you're wacky rigging, it's an open hook typically, and so you don't set the hook like you would a jig or stuff like that. You'll end up ripping the bait out of the fish's mouth. You just start reeling just like you do a drop shot. Just start reeling and tightening up on it, and you'll get that hook in that bass. But if you set the hook really hard, you'll miss him. So that's a huge thing with wacky rigging. Now, I was wacky rigging trick worms before there were Senkos. You just take your trick worm, you put your hook through it, and it was just whatever worm hook I had on there, throwing it into the grass and the cover, and using it like a jerkbait, reeling and jerking and causing it to swim out just like this. And that saved a bunch of days of fishing for me on Lake Altoona fishing for spotted bass. But I would catch a lot of largemouth shallow doing that. So, that's a huge thing, is just the, use that action to your advantage. When you're throwing a Senko, let it sink down to the bottom, and then as you're bringing it up, don't just lift it and let it fall again. Jerk your rod around while you're reeling it up, and let it fall down again. So kind of an attractive little thing. It looks like a bait fish, an injured bait fish swimming. So did that answer your question, or did I get totally off the subject, Trenton?
Oh no, you totally answered it. I was just looking over here. Cause have you ever heard? Well, I'm sure you have. Have you ever heard of the MJ rig?
MJ rig. Explain it to me. I may have heard it.
I can show you. I got one rigged up right here. Profound Outdoors makes them. I think that's Timmy Horton's sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they make them, and it's just a Senko with a worm hook or whatever hook fits, and you put just like just a normal willow leaf blade on the back of it. Mine's pretty big compared to the size of my Senko, but they usually use like a little small number 2. I was just wondering if you were familiar with it. I saw again. I watch him a lot because he fishes these lakes over here in Alabama.
Yeah.
But I was watching Timmy Horton where he was fishing an MJ rig, and he was just bringing it up and in and out of grass, just fishing it like a normal worm.
Yeah. They attach it. If I remember correctly, they attach it using like a hitchhiker, what we call a hitchhiker, a little corkscrew thing that screws into the end of it. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I made my own because they charge like $4.99 to buy them, but yeah, you can. And it's all it is just a little, like the little screw lock. And mine. Yep. I just took a little small spring and just screwed a swivel and the blade on the back of it, and it works great during the springtime.
Yeah, and you can buy those hitchhikers, all the components for that, for really cheap. The hitchhikers are real cheap and everything else. So buying them all put together would probably be pretty expensive. Another thing that I've seen done, and I haven't done it, but a friend of mine who fishes Senkos a lot, he takes and he'll take a toothpick and he will tie a feather onto the end of it, kind of like the feathers you see on the end of a topwater baits.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ties it on the end of it, and then he takes the other end and puts super glue on it and sticks it into the end of your Senko. So it puts a tail on that Senko that's a feather tail.
Okay.
And he swears by it. There's a lot of little gadgets. The funny thing is and I've heard this may just be hearsay, and I may be totally wrong with it, but I've heard that the Japanese make fun of us because we're afraid to modify our baits. And which is true. We think a bait ought to be perfect right out of the box because that's what the companies want us to think, is that a bait is perfect out of the box. And typically it is. But there are a lot of people, and I've got some friends and some acquaintances that are just tinkerers, and they can make a bait amazing that was perfect right out of the box. So, you know, the big thing is play around with stuff. Use your scissors and cut stuff. I know Mike McClellan takes his brush hogs and cuts those big paddles in half to make them 2 little appendages. You know, tons of things you can do with a pair of scissors or super glue to make things crazy. You know, cut a Cinco in half and make it look like a cross. You know, just glue one half onto one side of another Cinco and one half to the other, and then you know you got a Wacky rig and a regular Cinco all built into one.
They actually have those on Tackle Warehouse. They have these X worms.
Yep.
Yeah, I saw those at Bass Pro Shops.
Yeah, Mega Strike tried to come out with some, and what was Bobby trying to name it? But he couldn't. The packaging was so expensive to keep those things straight that he couldn't afford to bring them out. And so they're awesome baits. They just, like I said, to keep them from bending and getting all torqued up, they've required a special kind of packaging that was just way too expensive. And you guys would have been paying $10, $15 for a box or a bag of those things. So
I know the major sponsored person considered the #1 fisherman in the world, Kevin Van Dam. He modifies all his Strike King spinner baits, whether it's making his skirts shorter or. Oh, and I'm sorry for going back to this, but I meant to ask you this earlier. Do you ever do trailer hooks on your frogs?
Not on my frogs. Typically, you know, one of the things I love to do when I'm fishing topwater is I'll have a follow-up bait. And usually it's a weightless trick worm, or, you know, if you guys are confident in Cincos, you could use a weightless Cinco. But if I'm throwing a buzz bait or a topwater frog or something like that, and I'm reeling along and I get a fish that short strikes it, I'm going to follow up with that follow-up bait, and it's going to get bit 90% of the time. And it's hard for me to get a walking action on a frog if I put a trailer hook on it. And I love to get that little tight walking action. So that typically, no, I don't put one on there. But always when you're fishing topwater, have a follow-up bait ready, and you'll catch that fish a lot of times. A couple hangouts ago, I talked about a tournament I fished with a buddy named Dan Grunard. He used to play baseball for California Angels, but he would throw a buzzbait, and I would sit there with a spinning rod with a weightless trick worm in my hand, and he'd be chunking that buzzbait all on the bank, and if he got a blow up, and the fish were missing it 90% of the time, he'd get the blow up, and I'd follow up with that worm, and that's how we ended up. I don't think we won the tournament. I think we came in like 2nd or 3rd that day, but we did pretty good in that tournament just doing that. So, you know, always have one ready. So.
I got a question. We talked about it last time. We were talking about the 50-pound mono through the eye of the hook once you Texas rig your worm.
Yeah.
Would it work on like a really low, like a 15-pound mono, or do I really have to go out and buy the 50-pound mono?
If I were you, I would use super glue. To be honest with you, you know, you know, you probably have super glue in your box already. But if you wanted to use it, I would use something heavier, like old 30-pound line, or you know, something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't. Really, Doug, I just, you know, use super glue to keep your hook or your bait up on your hook if you're having that problem.
Okay. So, yeah, I was having that problem all day.
Yeah, it happens.
It's those laser choke cars messing up my dang worm.
Oh, I don't want to go into that again. Yeah, but yep, I like my regular offset worm hooks and all the stuff that I've been using for years. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, but anybody else?
Gene, do you ever fish with sort of like aftermarket baits? Like I'm not sure if you're on Instagram or anything, but you know how a lot of companies are on Instagram and they make small baits like As a matter of fact, I have one sitting right here. Have you seen these new models? It's just a molded soft plastic swim bait, but they call them line throughs. Have you ever seen any of these?
Oh yeah. I fished line throughs before. Yep.
And I guess this is I don't know if this is a new release mold of a line through, but I know line throughs have been around for a second. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Now is that one that just somebody makes in their garage, or is that a?
One of my sponsors actually makes this one. It's just called the blood bait because it has that that bite mark in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the line comes out. But a bunch of different companies make it. This one's made by Cosmic Custom.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they sponsor me and they make some pretty good baits. But the only reason I'm with them is because they do a sensing process. And I was just wondering if you ever fish with line throughs and have you ever had any success with them?
Oh yeah. The reason I like line throughs, other than one of the tricks you might want to do with that is get some of that. I use Mega Strike because it's got that gel stuff and it stays on real good. And what it does is you basically just lubricate the whole bait with it. And when the bass bites it, it makes the hook set easier. That bait will slip out of the fish's mouth, and that hook will catch them, and it will keep that bait from getting ripped up so much. It'll last longer. But the reason I like line throughs is because the hook is loose, and so when you get bit, the bait comes out of the fish's mouth, and he's still got the hook, but that bait is away from him, so he's not tearing up your bait. And those things are expensive. The ones I use, the Osprey ones, the ones I have hanging on in my garage, but same sort of deal. Those are expensive. They're $15-20 a piece, depending on the size you get. And so you want a one that's going to last you a long time. The disadvantage to that is when you're fishing timber.
Yeah.
You got that exposed treble hook, and there's really nothing to bounce that bait to the point where it deflects that treble hook away from cover. So you get them hung up a lot, and I don't fish them anywhere around trees. I try to fish them around grass and things that I know that aren't going to get hung up. So
yeah, like you said, they are expensive.
Yep.
Of course, with my sponsorship deal, I get them for free, but they run pretty high with all these companies. And
yep.
This mold was just recently, I guess, released, and a lot of different companies are selling them.
Yep.
And but what a few people have done is they found a way to kind of make them weedless by not on this one, but they from the bottom portion here they take a little piece of they call it spine, and they just stick it out of the bottom of it, and it sort of makes it weedless. But
yeah,
I don't trust it because I use huge gamakatsu hooks, and when I fish with these, and I just can't. I really don't want to risk getting them hung up. But and plus it makes the action a little bit. The swim baits are already big and they're hard to maneuver, but the action is just a little bit lower on them when you buy the ones with that spine in them.
Yep. Yeah. When you're you need to do everything you can with those expensive swim baits to make them last as long as you can. Yeah. So that greasing them up and doing all that's a whole different ballgame. One thing I learned about the swim bait world is that it's pretty cutthroat one.
Yeah.
I've got a buddy of mine that makes swim baits, and every time that I post something about his baits online or anything else, anytime I ever say something, it ticks off half of my other friends that like his competitor stuff. It's kind of a high school type deal, and so I try to stay away from talking about swim baits too much. But I like to fish them. I don't fish them a lot, but there's tons of information online to be able that's out there that show you how to make them last longer is what I'm trying to say. So, but all right, guys. Well, it's 10:30 and actually it's 10:28. But I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I really appreciate it. I tried to read questions over on my YouTube list, but there was a lot of stuff on there that just was stupid that I'm going to have to go delete. And so it made it very difficult to find questions, so I didn't get to any of those, so I'm sorry about that. But let me do my little ending deal. Like I always say, visit bassresource.com for the answer to all your questions about bass fishing, and have a great day. People always say that's a tongue twister. Try to say that 3 times fast. Thanks, man. You guys take care. I'll see you. I'll try to do this next week.
9 o'clock?
Yeah, 9 o'clock Eastern time, same time.
All right.
All right, later, guys.
All right.